Data for our analysis services database can come from one or more relational data sources. When we process a database, which we'll learn about in more detail in a separate module in this course, we load the data into the cube and dimension objects that we've defined for that database, and the data source connection information describes where to find that data. We use the Connection Manager interface to select a provider, which can be a managed.NET provider, or we can choose from several native OLADB providers. The main thing to note here is that our data must be in a relational database. Analysis Services does not know how to retrieve data from Excel or from applications like SAS or from flat files. We'll have to import data from those types of files into a database first. Then we can use the data in Analysis Services. After we select a provider, we then specify the server and database where the data is stored, and also whether we'll be using the Windows user or a database login for authentication whenever Analysis Services needs to connect to the data source. The concept of a data source is probably familiar to anyone who's used data sources in integration services or reporting services along with other applications that require connections to data. In Analysis Services, however, we also have to define impersonation information. Remember that the purpose of the connection information is to tell Analysis Services where to find data for the cubes and dimensions during processing, and usually processing is done on a scheduled basis, so Analysis Services will not be processing within the security context of a current user, so we have impersonation information to deal with that. There are 4 options for impersonation information. If we want to hard-code a specific username and password, we can specify that Windows account as the first option here. The most common option is to use the service account. This is the account that's running the Analysis Services service, which is either a built-in account or a Windows account set up exclusively for the service. This might not be a good option if your data sources are on a remote server and you're using the local service or local system accounts because those built-in accounts are restricted to the local server. We can also select the option to use the credentials of the current user, but that's only useful when we're processing the database manually, and it will fail if we try to process as a scheduled job through SQL Server Agent or an integration services task. The 4th option is Inherit, and this option will look at the database properties on the Analysis Services server to see how we've defined impersonation there. By default, it will use the Analysis Services service account, but we can specify user credentials in the database properties as well. And that would be done, by the way, in Management Studio. Regardless of which option we use, it's important to ensure that the account that we choose has read permissions on the data source. Otherwise, processing will fail.